Let's talk today about porn addiction and some overlaps that I typically see. Leslie Wells, Connection Coach. I help individuals heal, thrive, improve, repair, and connect more deeply in their romantic relationships by looking at things through an attachment lens. I worked in the field of addiction right after I came out of my graduate program, and so I take a very different approach to the pornography problem. I have worked with 50-ish men before I actually started working on my own program, doing additional research before that, and have a totally different way of approaching it. And so I have a lot of experience in this and have learned quite a bit. One of the things that I see often in my practice, and I deal with things through an attachment lens. However, our attachment styles, our childhood blueprints, all of those things come into play when we get married. Attachment style is the biggest, and attachment sign is the biggest predictor of how we show up in our romantic relationships, particularly in marriage. If you have issues there, they will blow up your marriage. And one of the things that we typically see is pornography can be something that plays into that. So most of the men that I work with that have this particular problem or addiction come to me. I work with them. I work with their spouses. I usually do that individually, but I have a whole program to help them. And one of the things that I see over and over and over again are these men are avoidantly attached. They are usually dismissive avoidance, or they are fearful avoidance who lean really far on the dismissive end of the spectrum. And in addition to that, they lack emotional attunement. So we know that because of their childhood blueprint, that leads to their attachment style, that they were emotionally neglected. They did not receive emotional attunement. So one of the things that happens a lot of times that we hear from the spouse, and the biggest complaint, is not just a pornography problem. So if we cure that problem, if we deal with that, that's not enough, because they still lack the emotional attunement. The emotional attunement also plays into the cycle of going to the pornography problem, because they tend to not be able to emotionally connect with their spouse, and therefore the spouse will often reject them as far as intimacy, which leads them back into this pornography addiction. We'll go a little bit deeper into this. So here's the thing. These individuals, almost always when I dig into their background, because it's not enough to deal with just the addiction. We have to rewire the brain in order to deal with the addiction. I bring a faith perspective in for most of my clients happen to want a faith perspective. That's additional tools, an additional way that we need to tackle this. But there's so many things beyond that. We have to heal those childhood wounds. We have to earn secure attachment so that we don't keep going back to things like this. And then we also have to grow in the emotional intelligence so you can actually change the relationship with your wife, because pornography addiction gets in the way of connection. It deals with dopamine as far as neurotransmitters instead of oxytocin, and it's just so damaging to a relationship. So we have to be able to repair that and actually show up differently. It's not enough for you just to stop doing the thing that doesn't make you feel any safer to your spouse if you don't start showing up differently. So if we look at the childhood of these individuals, I almost always find that they were emotionally neglected. Their other needs were met. They could have had a parent who actually stayed at home and was there all the time, but emotionally their needs were neglected. So they did not learn how to attach emotionally to individuals. So when you don't know how to attach emotionally to somebody when you're having an issue, then what you end up doing when you end up meeting that rejection by distracting from it as a child. It's too uncomfortable to sit in that space and feel rejected or feel like you're not able to get that emotional attunement, like something's wrong with me, I must be defective. So what you do as a child is you distract. So these individuals typically end up dealing with all of their problems solo, keeping them in, dealing with them through distraction, suppression, disassociation, withdrawal. So they tend to find creature comforts to actually deal with anything that's going on internally, any kind of discomfort, any relationship problems, any feelings of failure, I'm not enough. And almost always when I work with these men, below the surface, we have these common wounds that show up in avoidance. These common wounds of, I'm going to fail, I have failed, I'm going to be rejected, or I've been rejected. They cannot sit in that space of rejection and criticism. They are hypersensitive to that. So when you're a child and you do not get that emotional attunement, when you're emotionally neglected, when somebody cannot meet you in those emotional spaces, then you begin to feel like something's wrong with me, I'm shameful, I'm defective, I need to push these things down because everyone else around me is not displaying emotions, and they're not here to help me with these things. And so they push them down and they walk around with this internalized shame. And of course, a pornography addiction hits on that wound even further, because there's a shame piece that comes after that that further confirms that defectiveness wound, that I am shameful, that I'm failing, that I can't get out of this, and it all just keeps spiraling. So when you experience shame and rejection and defectiveness, you tend to hide and isolate. So they tend to find creature comforts that allow them to do this. So these creature comforts can be anything. They can be, usually what I see on the healthy end of the spectrum, are overworking, throwing themselves into work where they can feel a sense of accomplishment, throwing themselves into hobbies like to the point where they're actually neglecting their relationships. Then they also do things like scrolling, binge eating, too much drinking, smoking pot, drugs, whatever kind of substances there are. And then, of course, pornography. Because they find safety not in connection, they find safety in drawing inward and putting distance between themselves and the person that is creating any kind of discomfort or feelings of rejection, failure, I'm not enough. That's where they tend to go. So when they self-soothe, a lot of times I find that they are in a flight response, which is a trauma response. So there's all this discomfort in places that they can't sit in. So they need something to numb it, to distract from it, to escape it. And that's where pornography comes in. And then after that, they go into a freeze response, because once we end up in this place of shame and full disassociation, when that shame hits, they are stuck in this freeze response. And then the cycle just continues. Because once you're in a freeze response, you really can't show up well in your relationships with the people that matter to you. And of course, you're getting these dopamine hits, which is the reward center of your brain, instead of oxytocin, which is the bonding chemical. And you already struggle with that because of the emotional neglect you experienced in childhood. Now you're giving that to your spouse. And so that's creating more discomfort that you then have to flee from that discomfort. And then you end up with the shame of that and that isolation that you're in because of what you're doing. And then you get into that freeze response, and it just continues. And so it is not enough to stop the addictive behavior. And we know that there are like detrimental effects of that. If you have any question, let me clear it up now. They have just done studies where they've actually looked at the brain of a heroin addict versus somebody who was addicted to corn, and guess which one had the most gray matter that was deteriorated in the brain? It was not the heroin addict. So we know scientifically, we have so much evidence with comorbidities in the DSM that pornography is absolutely detrimental to the brain and the wiring of our pleasure reward center and our neurotransmitters, and those neurotransmitters that are designed for connection and relationships. So it destroys relationships. So it's not enough, though, just to stop doing the thing or stop the addiction. We have to rewire the brain. We have to actually figure out how to heal the childhood wounds and the attachment styles that lead to any of this type of behavior to begin with, because it will just be replaced with something else, and you will not be rewired for connection by just stopping the addiction. And then I have to actually teach these individuals how to emotionally connect in the relationship so there can be proper repair and actually connection in the relationship where they were not taught that in their childhood. They literally didn't have the makeup for that or the neural connections and pathway for that because they didn't get that as a child. It was not modeled. They did not experience that. So based on that, you can see the overlap with attachment wounds and pornography addiction and how we end up there, and some of the different trauma responses that coincide with that attachment style, some of the deep core beliefs that go with it, the wounds that need to be healed, and that childhood blueprint. And so if you are someone that struggles with this, or you are a spouse that has a partner who struggles with this, I work with both individuals. I work with people who have the addiction, and I work with people who are working to repair from the betrayal piece and the trauma that comes from knowing that your spouse has this addiction. I do one-on-one coaching, and I often do one-on-two coaching after we've done some individual work, because the work is very, very different for each partner.